Welcome to Climate Quest. Our mission is to inspire the next generation of climate founders by showcasing the real world journeys of young entrepreneurs and investors in the climate space. We are on a journey to demystify climate tech and tackle the blockers young entrepreneurs are facing in building or starting new companies.
And today we're talking to Gyri Reiersen. She's co-founder and CPO of Tanso. Gyri's actually originally from Norway and came to study in Germany, where she ended up founding Tanso in 2021. And Tanso is actually a software company that offers climate intelligence to industrial companies with its solutions for corporate carbon footprinting, product carbon footprinting, ESG management for compliance with EU regulation, and more. And over the last 3 years, Tanso has been used by leading manufacturers in sectors such as machine manufacturing, electronics, automotive, metal processing, and Tanso currently manages that's going to be cut. Companies that are currently managing the equivalent of 2.5% of the German emissions. So Tanso is actually right now managing the equivalent of 2.5% of the German emissions on their platform, which is amazing. Gyri, we're so happy you are joining us, and we can't wait to chat with you on climate and entrepreneurship. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So we'll just jump into some first questions to understand your journey. And my first one would be, can you please introduce yourself quickly and share what inspired you in the beginning to start with a startup in the climate space?
Yes. So first of all, hi everyone. I'm Gyri. I'm, like you said, originally Norwegian, but live in Munich. I have a background in AI engineering and data science, and would call myself quite the nerd, to be honest. But I grew up on a farm in the remote area of Norway, and through that really early realized how much we depend on nature and seeing how not only weather, but of course also climate impacts, how my parents' business ran, right? And it was when I decided to study that I was intrigued by going from, Norwegian oil to also renewables and be part of that transition. So I decided to study electrical engineering. And over time, I got just increasingly worried with all the scientists saying how bad the situation actually is. And then through my studies, I volunteered and used my spare time then to work on climate and founded a couple of initiatives and decided also to do my research on climate and using the skill set that I had and my engagement to get more people to work on climate as well.
One question we want to ask all the entrepreneurs on here, because we think that it might get a lot of different answers, is what your definition of climate tech actually is.
Yeah, that's a good one. I saw this definition some years ago that climate tech can be divided into three. It's climate tech or climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and climate education. Where the mitigation part is about reducing our emissions directly. The adaptation part is to adapt to the consequences of climate change. And the last one, of course, educating people and being part of making sure that everyone is aware of it and take that into account for the future.
Thank you. Now we'll turn to your journey to starting a company and starting Tanso. How did you go about identifying the opportunity? Because I think that's something that people struggle with, where to start and what actually to work on.
Yeah, I was actually, so I've always been a tech optimist. And I was doing research on how to use AI specifically to scale nature-based carbon sequestration methods. So forests are the best technology we have at the moment. And using satellite imagery. And I was publishing papers in ICML workshops and AAAI. And realized that working on these, like I worked with the gold standard, for example, and doing carbon credits. And a lot of companies buying carbon credits didn't even know how much they were emitting. So there was such a big in transparency of how much am I responsible for, where are my sources, and then the EU Green Deal, so regulation in the EU, came up with this corporate sustainability reporting directive, in a way similarly that European companies, not American ones, but European companies have to declare or disclose their financial numbers every year. They also wanted to do all the non-financial numbers with assurance on top. And I was thinking, wow, what an opportunity. And in April 2021, this went through the EU Parliament and were voted on. And people were like, this is what we need to increase transparency. And through a couple of friends of mine that I met through university, we then started interviewing corporate leaders and like, so are you excited? And they were terrified. And they were like, we don't know even how to just manage the amount of data that is needed for this. And it's so much qualitative data, and there's all the new processes internally in these companies that needs to be built up. And that is kind of how Tanso gets started. We saw this opportunity, and 50,000 companies in the EU have to report. It's never done it before. That is, yeah. I always say that the parallel of in the 80s, it was called bookkeeping for a reason, because it was actually written in books. And now, this is the same for non-financials, and making sure that that is something that will be disclosed equally on the equal side as financial accounting.
Thank you. That's great. And you ended up focusing on some sectors that we talked about before. So industrial companies in Germany. Maybe you can say a few words on that, how you narrowed your focus.
True. So out of these 50,000 companies, 12,000 of them are manufacturers and industrial companies. And these 12,000 are responsible for a third of emissions. And in general, in Europe, Germany is responsible for a fourth of emissions. So sitting in Germany, even as a foreigner, sitting in Germany, seeing that amount of emissions, and it's not going to be easy to reduce them. Like decarbonization of the industry is not, oh, you just change a light bulb. Great, it's done. No, it's going to be really hard work, and it's complex. It needs technological solutions. That's why we're talking today, right? And that is exactly what motivated me as well, and said, okay, this is a big problem. It's big and complex, and this is what I want to work on to solve, because the scale of the impact or potential impact is so great. So on the one side, of course, the industry needs this solution because it's not as easy, but also on the other side, there's also then a market for it. It's not shallow solutions needed. It's actually more deep, complicated solutions needed.
Yeah. So when I think about it, you went about it in a way that looks at the materiality and the scale of the problem. And that's how you ended up focusing on your sectors, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to take the commercial side into it, but
yes,
that is also a big market opportunity that comes with it.
And maybe you can walk us through some of the challenges in the beginning. What were the biggest problems you were facing, and how did you tackle them?
I think there's every single day I face problems and challenges. Like it's a daily struggle. But I think the overarching burden of potentially running out of money is something that every founder recognize and feel that existential threat hanging over you. And it does take a toll. You get stressed and emotionally stressed if things doesn't work out, especially if you've hired people and you are responsible for their salaries. And that I do think that, especially when things are not going well, you feel that burden even heavier. And I think the most challenging part of founding is to hire the right people, but also to letting them go when they're not the right people, which I also think is something that you will have to do as a founder sooner rather than later. Or you should do it, because it's not always a fit, and sometimes you have to do that. But it's also like you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't get to hire and lead the best team possible, that idea will never become reality.
Yeah, that's so true. And do you think that there were any special challenges because you were building a climate startup?
I find it very interesting to look back at 2018 and the time before, especially the Fridays for Future climate marches in 2019. But in 2018, I tried to organize a panel discussion on sustainable business, and everyone was telling me that, sustainability, that's just greenwashing. Honestly, like, don't bother. And now I talk to corporate leaders, and they're all saying that this is business critical. We do need to understand our climate risk factors. We do need to understand especially when it comes to climate adaptation, but also when it comes to social factors and governance factors. There's much more due diligence required going forward. And in order to have a sustainable business, so sustainability has three aspects. It's economic, social, and environmental. And if environment doesn't work, then social doesn't work. People don't have, food and can't live. And politics break apart. People move. And you cannot do business in a country that has a political system that is completely destabilized. Not saying anything about the US, but it is definitely it's tied together. And if you want to run a sustainable business, you need to understand your impact and like the double materiality, as you said, Vicky, the double materiality of how do you influence the world, both environment and people, but also what are those impacts potentially? What can that have on you as a company? And that I just think is good business leadership. But that was tough in the beginning. We talked to a lot of investors who were just like, honestly, I don't think carbon will ever have a price. And now I think in the world, carbon pricing is the only environmental topic that is not being debated. Everyone is just like, yeah, that's going to happen. So it's good to see. But sometimes you have to, as a climate tech founder, have a bit of a keep your beliefs. I think challenge them, of course, but keep them, even though it's tough.
When you're early in a movement that is just starting off, even though we do have this higher awareness now, there might still be some sectors that people might think about joining that are very nascent and where they also have those headwinds. So I think that's a super good advice.
I honestly have to say, I love seeing how climate adaptation and carbon removal are also examples of changes in public opinion, where a couple of years ago, talking about carbon removal was, a faux pas. You cannot say that we've given up already. Same goes with climate adaptation. And now I talk to customers on a weekly basis where they're like, actually, we had so many disruptions, both in supply chain and in our own production due to our floodings. Like our building got flooded, and these are German companies based in Germany. It's not it's not something that happens somewhere else. There are heat waves. You have Valencia. There's more and more of these not climate events, but weather events, or extreme weather events that make people accept it more. And I'm sure that there's other aspects similarly that will be nascent topics that people are not comfortable with yet, that still needs research and still needs people working on them.
Definitely. I'm just jumping in. You both mentioned double materiality. For listeners who are a little bit newer to the topic, would you like to define what that is?
Yeah, happy to. Double materiality is a way of identifying both your financial materiality and your impact materiality. And financial materiality is a common part of what you focus on. And financial materiality is looking at what are risks and opportunities, what are the financial effects of positive or negative and I was supposed to say things that can happen to your company. So, for example, if you have a flooding that has a financial risk to it, and that is part of the financial impact assessment, and you have to then rate them and say how big is this risk, and like we focus on the main ones. So that's material topics. With double materiality, you do the same thing for impacts, where it's not about what can happen to your business, but how does your business impact the rest of the world and on people, and where you have to look at then positive and negative impacts that you can have on people. For example, you can have a positive impact that people love working for your company because you have flexible work hours. Or you can have a negative impact that you're emitting a lot of emissions that has a global effect. And in a similar way, you would have a materiality assessment looking at what are the most material impacts that you then have. And that's a double materiality, having both the financial and the impact assessment.
This is the perfect segue to our next question, which is how do you balance profitability with climate impact in your business model?
So for us, it's rather simple because our business model has aligned this incentive with commercial growth and impact. For me, that was very important when starting out. I get really motivated by impact, and why should I start a startup if I can't see that impact grow? And I think we've talked about this before, in different contexts of having. You can go into big corporates and move the needle by 1%, and that 1% has a huge impact. Or you can start from yourself, start with one company, then go to 2 companies, and then support 3 companies, and that amount of impact is maybe not as big. And so for us, it's rather simple that we have our carbon under management. We see the direct impact. And I think one fundamental point that I believe in is that you control and you manage what you measure. So you have the typical term, you can only manage what you measure. But I really believe this, if you measure something, you start to subconsciously manage it. If you measure the wrong things, you will manage the wrong things. And I think there's noise in measuring too much, and therefore we have the double materiality. But you should manage the things that are critical for you. And we see that with our customers, that the moment they get transparency into their own sustainability data, both when it comes to CO2 emissions, but also energy consumption, dependence on fossil fuels, water consumption, heat stress regions, and so on, they suddenly open their eyes and like, okay, well, with this we have to manage. We have to do something about this. And in that sense, it's easy for us to see the more companies we sell to, the broader we go, the more impact we can also have. And really, it's just a part of our business model. We give transparency and make it easier for companies to spend their time on actually managing and not just measuring.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you're able to showcase pretty good benefits in terms of their profitability, right? Because managing these resources goes straight to their bottom line, which is the perfect example of aligning sustainability as a revenue driver instead of just this arbitrary topic that sits somewhere in an org that nobody talks about.
Yeah, I would even challenge and say it's not only the bottom line, it's also the top line. It's not only the financial effects that you, like the risk that you account for, but also the chances. So shifts in markets, you have higher demand, you have new technologies that open up that are also chances that you need to have on your radar. And especially manufacturers, because manufacturers are building stuff, they're physical assets in the
Yes.
world. So like the chair you sit on, the table you have in front of you, the computer you have in front of you, all of this is built by manufacturers who all also have to innovate and have to look at their positive opportunities that also come with changing in social or environmental preferences.
Absolutely. And with Tanso, you're already driving such an important impact in the German market. We heard earlier that you are responsible for managing almost 3%. I'm going to round up of the overall impact. What is the impact you're most proud of? And could you talk a little bit about some of the other metrics that you're looking after?
So from a commercial perspective, I think, as I said, the big existential threat for startup founders is to survive. You don't have impact if you're dead. And with that, you have to look at ARR and NRR, of course. So like, how much are you making per year? For us, especially. But when it comes from an environmental perspective, we have 2 leading KPIs that we look at. One is a clear time to value. So are you able to shorten the time it takes to measure so that people can spend their time on actually managing? And that especially goes to reporting. We use a lot of AI. We use a lot of automation features to like, how can we simplify this to make it even shorter? And again, cutting out the noise, focusing on what is material, but also carbon under management and just looking at the amount of carbon and natural assets that at some point is on our platform. You also notice, in a way, also the responsibility that you have to not only do it correct, but also to make sure that these are actionable insights and that, again, the time to value is short. One thing I would add is also the social aspect, which we also measure. So we also have an NPS score, so a net promoter score for employees. We also care a lot about making sure that the team is running well and that the people we have who are really putting in also blood, sweat, and tears into making this, growing this impact, that they also have what they need to do so. So that's also, in a way, the triple bottom line. I think we've talked about previously, but the triple bottom line of how do you make sure that you have all the KPIs in one row.
Yeah. What are some of the things you're seeing that you would like people to build on? So, what are some of the areas you think still have opportunities? Maybe some areas that you feel are, on the contrary, oversaturated in terms of what you're seeing in the market?
That's what I say. I think I need to be careful about saying what is not oversaturated because I think the more people working on this, the better. One thing that really resonated with me, and I wrote a piece on it recently, is there is a mathematician called Richard Hamming who said or used to walk around in his lab, and he would ask people like, "So, what is the most important thing in your field?" And people would tell like, oh, in chemistry, it's this and that. And in mathematics, it's this and this equation that nobody has solved. And then he used to trick them a bit by saying like, why are you not working on it? And I really love that because he talks a lot about doing your life's work and you don't become a Nobel Prize winner by, I don't know, putting in 1 hour work. You have to do it very consistently. And I hope that the next generation founders are more these. I worked in procurement. I worked in, I don't know, a chemical company myself. I've seen these products. I know that biomaterials has potential, and really having these people in different jobs that love what they're doing and then saying, this is what I'm going to now take with a sustainability spin on it. Or like, I'm going to put the climate tech lens on it because the world needs, in every single joint, needs to have sustainability embedded into it. And that is, I think, like my advice to people, like, yes, there's a lot of cool things. Like, for example, materials, that is a topic that I find super interesting. But the world functions as it is. So you kind of need to find your role in the system and say, how can you tweak that, how to call it, screw or that parameter, and then follow your life's work and put in the work over the course of decades. I think this is not something that we solve tomorrow. We have to work it beyond 20.
Yeah, it sounds like there is potentially an element of entrepreneurship as well, people who are in those procurement departments or chemists, etc., that could even innovate from within the company. It might also be a question where you can tap into the resources of the company and build something internally versus going outside and trying to raise capital and sort of die on that very early hill of entrepreneurship. How do you think about a model like that?
I always thought I was going to be an entrepreneur, to be very honest. That's where I saw myself. I think we need both. I think you need the right environment to grow or to build your solution and scale it. And if you don't have the right growth environment in a company or in a corporate, which might be the case, might also not be the case, and you have that growth environment, then go for it. The goal is not to be a founder or be called something. The title doesn't matter. But what matters is that you actually get your life's work out there. And you can similarly think about it if you're an independent researcher or if you're a researcher at Google or BASF or wherever. That doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. The big scheme of things is, are you able to actually move this needle further? And if that is maybe not in your lifetime, but somebody else's lifetime, that's part of the bigger whole.
What advice would you give to other young entrepreneurs who want to take action on climate change? So, those folks who are sitting internally or externally, how do you think they should go about bringing this life's work or birthing that climate baby?
I think often I've always said, like, you need to just talk about it first and ask people for advice. I'm very bad at asking for advice, and think I need to be the strong, independent woman who knows everything herself. So asking for advice and asking for help is probably the best starting point, but also don't get disappointed when people say, no, I don't think it will work out. And it will, like, I still get on a weekly basis someone saying, I don't think what you're doing makes sense. And I think that's going to be the case for whatever you work on. That someone says, "Nah, you don't matter," and you kind of have to find your own strength in that. And maybe then, as a advice, what helped me a lot getting through periods of doubts and getting periods of frustration is to have peers around you. Either from the climate space, there's a lot of groups, local groups like Work on Climate, or it's like just Google it and you'll find someone in your local area. But also finding people in your function. So, like, if you're an entrepreneur, find other scientists or find other, if you're working in HR and you want to work on this as well, like, find other people in HR where you can both influence them but also get their expertise. And especially as founders, and especially as first-time founders, you need other founders around you to just ask the practical stuff. There's one quote I really love from, I think it was Pablo Picasso, who said, when art critics meet up, they talk about, like, the sensation and the form and the emotions that it triggers. When artists meet up, they talk about where to get the cheapest paint.
That is
And I
amazing.
love that quote, because that is kind of what it is also to be a founder. You can be on stages, you can talk about sustainability, you can talk about policies and everything. But the everyday business of, hey, do you have a draft contract that I could borrow and, like, look that I'm not totally off? Or having someone else saying, you know what, I also really struggle with that at the moment. Sometimes it just keeps you motivated and keeps you help you to move on and keep on going.
Absolutely. And this is so nailed on the head why Victoria and I started this podcast, because we wanted to create this safe community of entrepreneurs where we're sharing the good and the bad and inspire others who maybe are not feeling ready to ask the questions, but hopefully listening to us having these conversations, they can start and find their little tribe. What are some of the things you think you would do differently if you had to start all over again?
What I would do is to ask more for help, and to dare to reach out. One mentor of mine once said, worst case, you get a no. And if you don't ask, you definitely get a no. And I think there's so many serendipitous encounters that I've had that have moved me forward or helped me. But also people like to help. I think especially for women and especially for female founders, there is a big hurdle of, I don't want to be perceived as I don't know my thing. And there's much fewer female founders out here to ask for help and feel like the hurdle is not that big. But in a nutshell, the boys clubs, they ask the same questions. And luckily, I have to say, I also have my super supportive male founders that help me a lot. And when I realized the question they ask, like, for example, I started a CPO Stammtisch, as it's called in German, so like a monthly meetup with just a small round of people I trust. And I realized them asking questions, sometimes, like, even I can answer that actually, which sometimes boosts my confidence a bit. But also it helps a lot to hear the questions they ask, because that might be one or two steps further that I haven't really anticipated these questions even. So also, I know I don't always have the best questions, or answers for that matter. But I love to learn through others as well, and listening in and learning from others and learning groups, I think, is super valuable.
Yeah, that is the perfect segue to our resources. So, learning groups, communities, other entrepreneurs, advisors. Is there anything else, any resources or tools that you would recommend to others, or any type of learning that you do that you think people could replicate?
I think everyone should have a fundamental baseline knowledge of what climate is and how it works and the likes. I can highly recommend for those who have access to it to do the climate reality leadership. What is it called? Leadership training with Al Gore. I think that is very eye-opening to go through that. But also just reading or listening to audiobooks, if that is easier. Listening to, I think the two ones that for me covered most, I would say, is the climate book by Greta Thunberg. Also has a lot of great illustrations, but you go through that book on Audible, it's actually super interesting to just hear this is the status quo. This is how, I don't know, ice sheets work. And just for a nerd like me, I love that to just, okay, I think I get how the mechanisms works physically. And then you can also interpret how the world works then without them or with them. One book that I recommend everyone is The Ministry for the Future by, what is it called? Kim Stevenson or something, Robinson, which I think everyone working in climate should read the first chapter with the discussing, spoiler alert, with the first chapter of Ministry for the Future is about a heat wave in India that continues and kills people because of it, how hot it is, and how the world then becomes desperate of, hey, we need to save our people. Therefore, we go to take drastic measures to save people. And I think that connects for me, not the pure environmental stuff is one thing, but what keeps me up at night is how this is going to affect people and how this is going to affect our political systems and how this is going to affect how we treat each other and how we see each other when we become desperate as humankind. I don't think that we are as kind as we like to be. And that makes me very terrified.
And books help make that more tangible, right? Bringing that into the now and making us able to actually imagine. Thanks, Gyri, for sharing that. We hope to end on a positive note and turn to the future. And I first of all, to close off, I wanted to ask for the listeners who might be wondering how to get in touch and engage with Tanso. What are some opportunities for that?
Yes, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. I write a lot there and share a lot there. Same with Tanso. We also have a lot of updates there, focus on the DACH market, so the German-speaking market. But still, I think there's a lot of good resources also on LinkedIn. So just follow everyone that you think are sharing cool stuff. I think that's how I learn a lot.
Yeah, that's a great, always a good tip. And what are you looking forward in your next months with Tanso? What's up with Tanso and what's next?
Yeah, 2025 is going to be such a pivotal year for Europe when it comes to corporate sustainability reporting. It's the first year where companies have to disclose their double materiality and everything that comes with the non-financials. It also something that we see at Tanso that we're super exciting phase. We're growing, we're hiring. There's a lot of things happening at the same time, and it feels good to hit the nail on its head and be to fit the timing and really have also the great team built up already that's ready to tackle it. So I'm super excited. I think I have the best job in the world at the moment.
Amazing. Given the current dynamics in the world, I think Europe will have to step up even more. We're going to have to have some push from the European side, maybe the California side. Given the time that we're recording this in, we can also look into, is there anything you want to tell American listeners how they could think about the coming time, the coming months, the coming years, and how to get involved and active?
On a positive note, we as people who are mission driven and see this, we are also more prepared than ever. The IRA is also implemented and really going full steam even conservative Republicans are rather positive to clean tech and all the employees that they see coming out of it. And one thought that I had for Europe is that probably we need a project 2030. We need a concrete, how are we going to knock out all competition in the world and make sure that also we are leading and taking 2 steps when the US stops taking steps forward. And I honestly believe that, yes, within the US, there's a lot of good machinery and momentum already. And it's more about, again, cutting out the noise. What are the things that, okay, well, there is always a trade-off. Let's focus on what really matters. What is the material topics? And I think there's so many smart, brilliant minds in the US that can work on these topics and can also influence in their daily lives, not only politically, but really on the how do we adopt the new solutions? How do we get the building permits for small things in your local community? Like it's these small steps that all make it go bigger. And I wouldn't mind having a huge US unicorn coming up that happens to be both commercially very attractive as well as something working on or having a strong impact on climate as well.
Great. Thanks, Gyri. That's a great note to end to people in the US and Europe, wherever you are. Your impact will be meaningful. And thank you so much, Gyri, for joining us. This has been extremely insightful and a lot of fun. And I hope that a lot of people will get to know Tanso and that also the European and American startup scene will grow together in the next years. Thank you, Gyri.
Thank you
And
so much.
thank you.